Auditorium, we are going to get to enjoy hearing from Ben Hayes. Ben is the preaching minister up at the Highland Park Church of Christ in Muscle Shoals, and so it's a treat for us to have him. Our young people know him as a part of Ben and Travis from CYC, and his topic tonight isn't quite as humorous or funny as he usually is at CYC, but I'm sure we will enjoy it anyway. I wanted to tell you this about Ben. He's also, besides being a preaching minister, he served as the youth minister there for about 3 years, and now has been preaching there for about 3 years, and so he's been there for some time. He also is a licensed counselor that provides a wonderful service to members of the church and to the community in counseling and encouraging and helping in that way also. Ben is married to Kenya. They have 4 kids. And their ages are 9, 7, 3, and 6 months. And so, yeah, he's a brave man. So you can, maybe we all could learn something from him in bravery. Ben loves to hunt and fish like I do, and we enjoy getting to spend some time together, and we've known each other for a long time. Tonight he'll be talking to us about the teleological argument, which is a big way of saying the argument for the existence of God from design. And so we look forward to having Ben and share his thoughts with us. Ben?
Good evening. It is good to have you all here tonight, and to have you having me here tonight is what I should have said, I guess. I appreciate the opportunity to come and to spend a little time with you. I do want to make a couple of statements up front that this is probably not in my wheelhouse as far as things that I typically talk about and I typically work on. I told Trey I was maybe a little mad at him when he first gave me these topics, because I had to dig a little deeper than I usually do on certain things, because I'm just not a scientific mind. However, I'm kind of happy that he did, because it let me refresh my brain on some of these topics and read some new stuff that I haven't read in a while. I'm thankful for Dr. Barfield. I don't know if you are aware of Dr. Kenny Barfield from Florence. He was a teacher of mine in high school, and we covered a lot of these things, and he helped me a lot with it. I'm thankful for guys like Kyle Butt and others who you guys probably know of, Apologetics Press and others. So a lot of the things I'm going to share with you are not my own thoughts. They're not straight from my own brain, but I got them from studying some other people and looking at some other things. So I hope that you are, there's something from tonight that you can get, that you can benefit from, and I think there will be. I've benefited from it, so I hope that you will as well. When you look at the picture that's behind me, when you see those things, most of us think about design. If we see that, we're going to automatically say, well, those things came into being because somebody designed them. Whether it's the watch or whether it's the airplane, of course, if we find something that intricate, if we think about something as intricate as a watch or an airplane or an automobile, there's no doubt in our mind when we stumble across those things in the middle of a woods or in the middle of a field, we're not going to go, well, that just all of a sudden happened. And that seems logical to us. That seems like something that makes sense to you and I, that would be the logical explanation, that someone put it there. As he mentioned, I love to hunt. I love to shoot a bow. You don't walk upon a bow that's been strung and has been taken care of and automatically say, well, look what just happened here. It was something made it, something brought it into being and put it there. And when you look at the other pictures, the picture of the cuttlefish or the picture of the human brain and the skeletal system, why can we look at those things and all of a sudden say, well, those things just happened, those things just came into being? And so the argument from design, the teleological argument has already been said. Teleological comes from the Greek word just simply meaning of a design or a purpose, the end of something or a purpose of something. That everything has some sort of purpose or design to it. And scientists will get real close on that. They'll get real close to using that language, and then they try to back off from it. They'll say, well, it looks as though it was designed or has the appearance as though. And so we can make this argument all night, and we could make it to an atheist all night. And to some, they're not going to necessarily accept it because they're going to say, well, there's other things that would prove that there's not design. And I'll talk a little bit about that as we get toward the end. But the basic premise is, if the universe evidences a purposeful design, then there must have been a designer. And according to us, the universe does evince a purposeful design. Thus, the universe must have a designer. So when we think about those things, we see these things, then we say there was a builder. Hebrews chapter 3 and verse 4 says the same thing, that every house is built by some man, and the builder and maker of all things is God. So the Bible lets us know right off the bat that, we understand this with a house. Why can't we see that all things were built by something? So let's kind of look at these things. I want us to start, I'm going to make sure I can work this. There we go. I want us to start big, okay? We're going to start big. We're going to start with the universe. And there's a lot of numbers up here, and I don't want you to get too swamped by the numbers. I just want you to think for a moment how large our universe is. 1 billion galaxies, according to scientists, 100 billion stars each, 25 sextillion stars in all. That's 25 with 21 zeros after it. That's a lot of stars. It is expansive. It is huge. To travel our universe, according to scientists, then at light speed is 186,000 miles per second. That's pretty fast. A light year is 6 trillion miles. The Milky Way, according to scientists, is 100,000 light years across. So if you could get in a vehicle that would go a light year, it would still take you 100,000 years to get across the Milky Way. It would take you 20 billion years to get across the universe. That's a long way. That's a lot of miles. That's a lot of space. The heavens are telling the glory of God, and their expanse is declaring the work of His hands. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words, their voice are not heard. In other words, what he says is, when we look up in the sky, it tells us about God. When we look at the expanse, we look at the vastness of it all, it tells us, wow, how did that get here? How did that just come into being? And even though it doesn't speak words, it speaks to us. Even though it doesn't speak words, it tells us. I love to bow fish. Some of you guys might have done that before. But we go out on a boat, we stay all night long, and at some point we have to turn the generator off and refill it. And that's my favorite time of night, because it's like 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. It's absolutely dark. We're out in the middle of nowhere. There's no other lights around us. And when we turn them off, I can see every star in the sky. And I can't even fathom the greatness of it all. The expanse of it all. That's how big this universe is. But when we start talking about design, let's kind of start bringing it back down a little bit. What about our solar system? What about the things that are happening just around us? The things that we can actually see, like the sun and the moon and the earth. Well, there's a lot of perfection in the way that it's set up. Now, again, I borrow a lot of this stuff, so if I've got a number or so wrong, you're welcome to tell me afterwards maybe, and we'll discuss and try to figure out what I've got wrong. But these are things that I have seen and I have read, and I think they're pretty accurate. 93 million miles from the sun is what our Earth is, and it only varies by a very small bit. It only diverts from a straight line by about 1/9 of an inch every 18 miles. If it were any different from that, if it was 1/8 of an inch, then we would burn up. If it was 1/10 of an inch, then we would freeze to death at some point. Only that perfect rotation, that perfect route that it takes. And as it's taking that perfect route, it takes it in a perfect amount of time. If the rotation around the sun took too long, or if it was halved, then the seasons would double. And it would be too extreme of a winter and too extreme of a summer for us to be able to have the things that we have. And if it were doubled in time, if it went around the sun faster, then it wouldn't be time enough to grow the crops that we grow, and we couldn't sustain life. It's got a perfect rotation. It's got a perfect time rotation. It's got a perfect tilt. If it were not tilted so much as it is, about 23.5% on its side, if it were not tilted like that, if it were straight up, we would have no seasons. If it were on its side, they would be too extreme again. We're talking about a perfect setup. It's hard for me when we talk about a perfect setup to argue with the existence of God. It's perfectly placed in our solar system. When you look at Pluto, it's negative 230 degrees Celsius. You look at Venus, it's 480 degrees Celsius. One would burn up, one we would freeze. There's no way life would be sustained. but the average temperature of our surface is 11.3 degrees Celsius, perfectly suitable for life to exist. So you think about those things, you think about those numbers, and you think about how God has designed a perfect planet for us with a perfect moon, by the way. If we didn't have the moon, what would happen? Well, it is placed from us about 240,000 miles away. It controls our tides. It keeps our tides moving, which cleanses our shore, one, but it also keeps everything in the ocean from stagnating. We know what stagnant water looks like on a pond or anywhere else. If the oceans were to stagnate, that would be a bad thing. Number one, or before we even get to that point, what if it were closer or farther away? If the sun or the moon were closer to us, then our tides would be too tremendous and they would overwhelm us. In fact, some scientists would say that about 35 to 50% of the Earth, or that most of the Earth would be covered by about 35 to 50 feet of water because the tide would be too much. If it were farther away from us, that's when they would stagnate. Well, what's the big deal if they stagnate? Well, if they stagnate, there's some things that would be influenced, specifically the bottom one that you see here. 90% of our oxygen that we have to survive comes from tiny microscopic things that live in the bottom of the ocean. If 90% of our oxygen comes from things that live in the ocean and the ocean stagnates and everything dies, how does that affect us? Well, pretty significantly, I would think. And of course, the ocean is important for a lot of other things, as you can see. 72% of the earth is covered by water. It's constantly evaporating and raining back down upon us. It's providing heating and cooling. It makes for a perfect scenario to keep our planet the temperature that it needs to be. And so we think about all of these things, and to me, as we go from the expanse of the universe down to the solar system and thinking about what all is here, it again speaks of a design. I love this passage in Job 38, verses 8 through 11. Listen to what he says. Or who shut in the sea with doors, when it burst forth and issued from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band, when I fixed my limit for it and set bars and doors, when I said, this far you may come, but no further, and here your proud waves must stop. And when you think about that moon and what it does and how it controls, and here God's telling Job, look, I'm the one who set that limit. I'm the one who put those things in place so that it would go no further and it would stop where it's at. The design that God gave us. The design that God gave this planet so that we can have it. So we go from the universe to our solar system, and both of those things seem to indicate some sort of design. And like I said, even scientists have struggled with this because they also would say that it appears as though some things are very much designed. Let's look at a couple of other things. Let's keep getting a little smaller. Let's go to design of our animals and the plants on this great earth that we live on. You know, when I think about we could spend the rest of tonight, tomorrow night, and for the next 2 years talking about the various animals and plants, and this is probably the part that I enjoy the most. I hope that I can express it the way that I want to, and I hope that I can tell you the things about it, but we could spend a lot more time talking about animals than we talk about anything else, because the beauty and the intricacy of what's been created. Again, years ago in the 18th century, William Paley came up with the watchmaker theory argument. And the watchmaker theory basically was, if you walk into a field and you find a watch, then you automatically assume that someone has made that watch. It's got perfect design, it's all those different things. And so he used that as an argument for the existence of God. And that's basically where we get the argument that we still talk about today. It comes from Paley's argument. So if that's the case, then there's an interesting thing. What if you found a watch that worked perfectly well, that was the size of the head of a pin? If you found a watch that small and it worked perfectly well, not only was it a watch, but it was a compass as well. What would you do with that? Would you assume, well, that just happened by chance? That's what you have within the head of a monarch butterfly. Monarch butterflies travel hundreds of thousands of miles in their lifetime. And what scientists have discovered is that they actually have a biological watch, a biological clock within their little bitty minds, their little bitty brains that are no bigger than the head of a pin. And this watch within their head tells them where to go. It also acts as a compass. It leads them around, shows them where to go, tells them when to hatch and do all the different things that they do. And it's all happening within a little bitty brain. What do you do with that? I mean, how do you explain those sorts of things? How do those things just happen? And it doesn't really stop with the butterflies. There's actually, if you want to talk about one of the largest or tallest creatures that we have on the earth, then you have to talk about a giraffe. Have you ever thought about how difficult it would have been for a giraffe to have evolved? Now think about this. If a giraffe is evolving, and what they would say was it's evolving so that it could reach higher plant vegetation, okay? So it's got to have a lot of things happening at the same time. It's got to evolve a longer neck, which is pretty incredible in and of itself. We don't have any fossil records of any halfway betweens, but it has to evolve a longer neck. But some other things have to happen. To get blood to the brain of a giraffe, then what's going to happen? It's got to have a heart that can pump blood 8 feet up a neck. Okay? And so if that blood has to go all the way up that neck, it's got to have the force to get to the top of that neck. It's got to be larger and bigger. It's also got to have larger lungs to be able to take the oxygen to be able to do those things. So at the exact same moment that it is evolving a longer neck, it has to evolve a bigger heart. And that bigger heart is going to be pushing more blood into the neck. Now, I would get you to do this, but I don't want anybody to get hurt. But if we all decided, like a giraffe, I need a drink of water, how does a giraffe have to take a drink of water? By putting its neck down, right? And have you ever bent over for a long period of time? What happens? Blood rushes to your head, you get lightheaded, you pass out, or whatever if you stayed there long enough. Imagine if it has more force, 2 to 3 times bigger and larger and more force, and a giraffe bends over to get a drink of water. Well, even now, how does that work? How does he do that? Because if he's doing that, all that blood pressure going into his head could be fatal. Well, let's say it's not fatal and he decides, because there's a lion chasing after him, that he's got to stand back up and take off. You ever stood up after you were bending over for a few minutes? That doesn't work out real well either. And so you pass out and fall over and he's eaten by a lion, end of evolution, right? It's not going to work. So how does that happen? How does a giraffe evolve, or how does a giraffe even function right now in that way? Well, there was a design. And if it wasn't designed, then it would have had to evolve at the exact same moment that the heart's getting bigger and the neck's getting longer. There's a valve system that God has employed within the neck of a giraffe that's much like the little things that you get at the hospital that keep the blood flow circulating in your legs. And it allows and it cuts off and it allows this rerouting of the blood so that when he is bending over to get a drink of water, it's not forcing all of that blood down into his head. But as soon as he comes back up, the pressure has been stabilized to the point that immediately he's ready to run or do whatever else. Now, that's hard for me to think that just evolved that way. Something had to put it in place that way. Something had to have a design for that to happen. In fact, listen to this. This is a famous evolutionist, Robert Wesson. This is what he said about the giraffe. He says the proto-giraffe, or the one that would have been evolving, had not only to lengthen neck vertebrae, fixed at 7 in mammals, but had to make any concurrent modifications. The head, difficult to sustain atop the long neck, became relatively smaller. Big lungs were necessary to compensate for breathing through a tube 10 feet long. Many muscles, tendons, bones had to be modified harmoniously. The forelegs were lengthened with corresponding restructuring of the frame, and many reflexes had to be reshaped. That comes from an evolutionist. He says all of those things have to happen concurrently. Is that really going to happen? I mean, my own take on that, and I'm not a scientist, so somebody may fire something back at me. My own take on that is that takes more faith than it does to say something that designed it. It's difficult for me to buy that whole story, that all of those things would have simply evolved within them. One of my favorite creatures is the cuttlefish. He's not necessarily into cuddling, but he's this kind of fish that, to me is the special agent of the sea. Okay? He can send messages to other cuttlefish by changing his color. And not only that, he can disguise himself as well as anything else in the sea. If he gets up against a barnacle, he can change colors to match, and not only color, but texture to match the barnacle. If he gets up against seaweed, he can match the color of the seaweed and even mimic the motion of the seaweed. And it happens almost instantaneously, without him even trying. When the scientists have watched them and observed them, they don't look to make sure that they're matching colors. It just happens. And what's even more amazing is that most of them have come to believe that cuttlefish are actually colorblind. So how do they know that they're matching the color? How do they understand that the colors are being perfectly matched and that their texture and all of those things are happening almost instantaneously? How does that happen? How does that evolve? The first time it didn't work, he gets eaten. The first time it doesn't work, he's gone. And you could go on and on about other animals. I mean, we could talk about the bombardier beetle. We could talk about bees and what bees are capable of, and the dances that now scientists believe that they do to signal to one another where food is at and how they can indicate how far away it is. And we could talk about all sorts of different animals, all sorts of different insects. We could talk about symbiotic relationships between animals, that what if those symbiotic relationships weren't there to begin with? How would those animals have survived? We could go on and on and on and on and on about animals. We can also talk about plants. Some of my favorite things that I discovered as I was studying, and some of these are new to me. I've looked at a lot of things in the past, and I'm sharing with you some of the newer ones to me because I thought they were so interesting. It has to do with pine trees. We have a lot of pine trees around here. We may not have these kind, but these are some pretty interesting pine trees. The ponderosa pine. It has large jigsaw puzzle-like bark. And what scientists have discovered is that in at least low heat fires, not large baking forest fires that destroy everything, but in those fires, those plate-like bark that is around it will actually break off as it catches fire so that it will preserve the tree and keep it from burning up. It will actually preserve itself. It will protect itself from the fire in low heat fires. So it can be preserved over time. Now, it doesn't even have a brain, and it figured those things out somehow. And another one, the lodgepole pine, actually has a small cone that it releases, and the only time that cone actually breaks open and releases seed is during large forest fires that destroy everything. And when they're destroyed or when they are burned, the heat will actually make them open up to reveal the new seed, and so that it continues even if the whole forest is burned down. Now tell me how the tree decided to do that. Was it designed that way? Did it just happen that way? It takes a lot of faith to believe it just happened that way. The whitebark pine is very similar in that it has a symbiotic relationship with the Clark's nutcracker bird. And this bird is the only thing that will open up the cone of that tree. And that cone, when it's opened, is put into the mouth of the bird. He flies around with it for a while. He may stick it in a stash somewhere, and eventually what's not eaten may blow out, and then that's how it reseeds. But it takes the use of that bird to make that happen. To me, that's at least says a little bit about theological evolution, because what if plants and animals weren't there at the same time? You know, you start thinking about some of those things, that's a difficult place, a difficult thing to explain. So plants, animals, our earth, our universe, all of those things, great things. We've gone from huge to all the way down to animals. I want us to do something real quick, and I want us to look at people for a moment. I think most of us understand there's about 4 things that make us up: cells, tissues, organs, and systems. And that kind of gets bigger as we go down the line. You have your cells make up tissues, your tissues make up organs, your organs make up various systems within your body. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because I don't think we have to. I think we all know how well our bodies work. But I want us to talk just a minute about cells. Some cells are so small that 20,000 of them will fit within the zero or the O of a typewriter, probably 12-point font, let's just say. 20,000. Now think about how many stars we were talking about earlier. 25 sextillion stars in the universe, and then we talk about something so small that it will fit 20,000 of them inside a zero. God designed things so small, and He designed things so large. Some cells are so small you could string 6,000 of them together side by side, and it would be about an inch. Even the largest of cells, as listed there below, is still very, very small. That's what our body is made up of multiple of those. I want you to hang on to that for a minute, because we're going to come back to it. We have, making up all those cells, then make up over 600 muscles in our body and 6 billion muscle fibers, all working together. Organs, heart, liver, brains, kidneys. I mean, I read a lot on the eyeball, just the eyes. You ever thought about how intricate your eyes are? I don't know if we have optometrists or anybody like that in here, but think about how amazing. Scientists have tried to replicate that for cameras and video cameras and all those things, and we still can't make one as good as what God actually made. And then when you couple that with the computer that we have inside of our head, the brain, people will never understand all the intricacies of the brain. They've prodded it, they've cut it open, they've looked into it, they've tried to determine all sorts of things about it, and we still won't know everything. All of these muscles and organs and tissues are amazing, and they're all working without us consciously trying to make them work. How many of you decide that your heart beats? And it starts beating. I've had 4 children now, so I've watched that little heartbeat on a monitor on a piece of rice 4 times. And see that little bitty heartbeat, and it's no bigger than a piece of rice. That's amazing. How does that happen? And then the fact that that same heart that's beating in that piece of rice on that monitor screen, 80, 90, 100 years later is still beating inside of a full-grown person. That's a lot of heartbeats in a whole lifetime. And it keeps on beating. Now, some of you have had trouble with your tickers, and I'm sorry about that. But those hearts continue to beat for years and years and years without you going, you know what, you need to start beating again. Sometimes we have to shock them, but most of the time they do it without us having to do anything. And we breathe without really thinking about it. All of these functions, my eyes have blinked the whole time that I've been talking to you, and I've not had to think about it one time. But it's given moisture to my eyes. It's taken care of all the filth on my eyes without me thinking about it. How does that happen? How does that just occur out of nowhere? And the systems that work together, those individual cells and muscles and organs working together day and night to create this system that we have. The reproductive system, the circulatory system, the nervous system, all these systems working together beautifully to make what we have, what's standing before us. It's no wonder the psalmist said, for you formed my inward parts. You wove me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. It's amazing what God has actually done within us. I want you to see something for a moment. This is borrowed from Dr. Kenny Barfield, and so if you see this again, he didn't steal it from me. I stole it from him. But these numbers, and I don't want you to get lost in it too much, but basically if you say there's a 1 in 10 chance of something happening, that's not a great chance. But if you start talking about what is the biggest thing, that number you can come up with where you would say this is actually impossible for it to happen. Well, one scientist said once you reach the point of 1 chance in 10 to the 50th power, that's a 10 or a 1 followed by 50 zeros, okay? A 10 to whatever power, okay? That's an impossible number. 1 chance in 10 to the 50th power is just almost certainly not to happen, period, okay? And when Darwin was doing his theory originally, he thought that proteins were pretty simple things, that cells actually were pretty simple things, that there wasn't much to them. They were just kind of like Jell-O. So that was his thinking about really what made up our bodies. Because we talked about cells being so small, proteins are actually smaller than cells. They're actually found within cells. So proteins are what actually makes up those little bitty things that fit inside, that 20,000 of them fit inside of a zero. Okay? Proteins. This is what scientists have concluded, that for a protein to just happen out of nowhere, this is the chance of it. 1 in 10 to the 161st power. That a protein spontaneously just happens. And that's not a cell, and that's not an eyeball, that's not an amoeba, that's not a small fish. That's the chance that 1 protein will come out of nowhere. 1 to the 160, to 1 chance out of 10 to the 161st power. 10 to the 50th power is considered impossible. Now, when we think about from this small microscopic things, and then consider the whole universe that we've just talked about, how do those things just happen? Can that happen by chance? Or does there have to be a designer? O Lord, our Lord, how majestic, how excellent is your name in all the earth, who has set your glory above the heavens. Skip down to verse 3. It says, when I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have ordained, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the sons of man that you visit him? For you have made him a little lower than the angels. You've crowned him with glory and with honor. When we read the Scriptures, they declare of God. They tell us about God. They reveal to us who God is. But beautifully, when we look around us, if we will just take a moment and look around us, if we'll just take time to open up our eyes, there's no doubt that there's design around us. Now, what atheists will tell you is that there are other times where design seems to be flawed. It seems to not make sense. And there may be other answers for that. For one, there's some things that years ago they said those designs don't make sense, and now they've found that they actually do make sense. There's been things revealed about them in the last 100 years that say, oh, wait a minute, those things were useful in some way. We just didn't realize it. That's possible. The other possibility is this, that according to Romans chapter 5, that when sin entered, so death entered. And when death entered, so did deterioration. So did the fact that our world will no longer be in existence forever, but that it will wear down, it will tear away. Our old tickers are going to run out. Those things about our lives that maybe would have lasted much longer, the original design possibly, are not going to last forever. God was not going to allow it because sin entered into the world. And so if that's the case with us, that could be the case with our world. That could be the case with the animals. That could be the case with everything. That when sin entered, we know that weeds entered and all sorts of difficult things. So there are some explanations from our scriptures that say, yep, maybe there are some problems with the design now, but they weren't there initially. And so when we think about these things and we think about this lesson and you think about your life tonight, I hope that some of the things that we've talked about are something that you can take with you, and maybe it strengthen your faith. Maybe it can strengthen someone's faith that you know. I hope that it's some things you can share. And if you've never been on Apologetics Press website, you can read most of those stories, most of those things by going on there. It's very easy. It'll say design in nature, design in animals, design in plants. It'll go into all the other arguments that some of your speakers are going to be talking about. And you can find all sorts of great stuff that will help you build your faith. And so as you think about those things, I want you to think about your life with Christ right now. Romans chapter 1 and verse 20, one of the most powerful passages I think about the creation of the world. It says this, "For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes, His eternal power, His divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that we are without excuse." You can look around, stars, sun, the moon, at the earth, at the monarch butterfly, at the giraffes, at the cuttlefish, at the pine trees. You can look in the mirror, and it's evident that God exists. And if God exists, then what does that God expect of you? And maybe that's the question that a lot of people don't want to have to answer. But it's a question I think most of us are willing to answer. What does God expect out of me? He's called us to live for Him, to make Him the Lord of our lives. Maybe you've never made Him the Lord of your life. You've never come to Him believing in Him, believing that He's a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him, believing in His Son, that His Son died on the cross, was buried, and was resurrected. Confessing that Son as your Lord and Savior, repenting, turning away from the sin in your life, and turning towards God. And being buried, being renewed, having your sins washed away in baptism, raised up to walk in newness of life. Maybe you've never taken those steps towards God. Maybe today is the perfect time to do that. If we can assist you or help you, won't you come as we stand and sing?
Things that are higher, things that are nobler, these have I learned, my son. I will hasten to Him, hasten so glad and free. Jesus, greatest, highest, I will come to Thee. I am resolved to go to the Savior, leaving my sin and strife. He is the true one, He is the just one, He hath the words of life. I will hasten to Him, hasten so glad and free. Jesus, greatest, highest, I will come to Thee. I am resolved to follow the Savior, faithful and true each day. Heed what He saith, do what He willeth. He is the living way. I will hasten to him, hasten so glad and free. Jesus, greatest, highest, I will come to